Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our Week 7 DFS and prop preview out there for Sunday's main slate. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of your exposure with, first off, a look at the Draftkings DFS side and how I'm approaching the slate with my top 4 stacks of the week, 4 game environments that I think are ripe for the taking, some low-owned leverage options that we can use in our lineups to give us some differentiation, try and find some top-end upside, and hopefully find ourselves towards the top end of the GPPs. And then after that, towards the latter half of this video, is where we're going to go over the prop stuff. That'll be our Underdog and Prize Picks props. I've got 4 that I've already entered myself. You might want to consider adding to a few slips of your own. So that's all we've got, guys. Let's go ahead and hop right on in, not waste any time at all, and start it off with our top 4 stacks of the week. First up, we've got Jordan Love and the Packers, who are not only in one of the higher totals of the entire week, but the whole offense in general is one of the lower-owned options that we can get to. So they're an option for some leverage and have a lot of upside out there as well. So obviously a lot of different options that you could stack them with. I would say that you want at least one pass catcher out there with Jordan Love in every lineup. I don't know if you need to go a full 2 or even 3-man stack for that offense, but because it is nearly a 50-point over-under, you might want to consider going with the double stack with Jordan Love. And on the other side of that, maybe even a CJ Stroud-led lineup with 2 players there from the Texans. This game environment is going to be one of the more attractive ones on the slate. And even though I have Jordan Love as the main play here, you've also got CJ Stroud at about 2% ownership. And whether you're using some of the Texans as a stacking option alongside a CJ Stroud or as a buyback to the Jordan Love started lineups, they're not going to be that chalky on that side either. You've got a little bit of ownership out there on a Joe Mixon. He's the chalkiest option that you could use for a buyback, but because Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs are appropriately priced this week, they're not super cheap. With Nico Collins out for quite some time, they're going to be about average ownership, which I think is totally fine in this high total sort of game, especially if you're trying to use them for some buyback correlation. So this game environment, when you have 2 competent offenses going against each other, that is almost always going to be something I'm going out there and targeting, especially when they're not going to be super high owned out there in GPPs. Next up, we got Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions, and also the highest total of what we have on the entire slate. So that's going to be that Lions-Vikings game. 2 solid offenses once again, but also teams that have started off hot this year. So a lot of form going with either side. You could say that the Packers, even the Texans, have been maybe a little bit sluggish to start this season. Not the case with these 2 teams. They've both been firing on all cylinders lately. Look at the Detroit Lions just blowing out the Cowboys last week, and of course the Vikings being one of the better teams in the NFL right now. So I think a lot of people are going to be playing this game, but not nearly as many are going to be using Jared Goff at the quarterback position. If you take a look at Sam Darnold's ownership, which of course these are my Patreon projections on the sheet right here, a lot of it is censored because I've got to keep some of it behind the paywall over there in Patreon, but Sam Darnold is nearly 4 times higher owned than what we have with a Jared Goff. So if you're going to try and get a little bit of leverage, the side to do it on might be Detroit, and then using some of the other side as a buyback. So you can see on here, St. Brown, Laporta, Williams are all guys you could use for some correlation. You could even try and sneak in a Jahmyr Gibbs, a David Montgomery at running back. That would be a suitable way to go after some of that as well. But the buybacks are extremely plentiful. So you not only have Aaron Jones, Jefferson, and Addison, which have been in the mix for quite some time, but also TJ Hawkinson potentially returning as well. So I would say if Hawkinson returns, that's just another weapon in this overly loaded game to begin with. So I think you should be trying to get over the field on a lot of pieces out here between these 2. But I think Jared Goff in that quarterback position might be one of the sneakier ways to try and find some leverage, because you've got ownership on pretty much every skill position player on both sides. St. Brown, the running backs for Detroit, wide receivers for either team, especially Justin Jefferson towards the top, are all going to be extremely highly owned. So the one spot that you can really find any sort of low ownership are on guys like a Jared Goff, maybe a TJ Hawkinson if he plays. Jordan Addison is also a little bit lower owned than some of the other players, but that's why I like Jared Goff so much. He's maybe that one beacon of leverage that we can look to in this game to try and get a little bit different off of some of the other pieces of chalk. We've also got Brock Purdy here, so just $100 cheaper, and you guessed it, the 49ers-Chiefs game are 2 extremely competent teams going against each other in one of the higher totals of the entire week. So a lot of what we said about the first 2 stacks, we can copy and paste out here to stack number 3, but you can see the ownership number slightly higher than the first 2 options. I do have Brock Purdy at 4.4% ownership, but without a Jawan Jennings out there in the lineup, I think you're going to see very concentrated usage. So a Brandon Ayuk would be my top stacking option right here. You got Deebo Samuel, who we'll talk about when we get to props a little bit later. I'm expecting a lot of involvement for him in the offense as well. George Kittle, you could even go with Jordan Mason if you wanted to run some running back correlation. The buybacks, though, are where I think you could go after correlation here, because that Chiefs offense, it's hard to really narrow down one specific player, especially when it was Rashee Rice, you had Kelsey out there, Worthy, all these different options, all the running backs with Pacheco to start this year. But with all the injuries that they've had, you have Rashee Rice out, Pacheco's no longer playing, will maybe a month from now come back to the team, but it's Kelsey, Hunt, and Juju at this point. Whether you want to go for some running back correlation, some PPR correlation out there with a Travis Kelsey, I would say if you're starting with a Brock Purdy-led lineup, that Hunt would make sense, maybe assuming that Brock Purdy has to come back and throw a lot in that kind of scenario. And even if you wanted to start with Brock Purdy going out there and kicking some ass, you could use Kelsey as a buyback as maybe they grow that lead because of how well Purdy plays. So I think that it fits a lot of different scripts. I think the buybacks are wide open if you start with a Brock Purdy-led lineup. And because he's sub 5% owned, he's not going to be mega popular out there. And I guess you could say the same thing about Mahomes. He's actually even lower owned than we have with Brock Purdy, but you have Purdy at $600 cheaper. I also like the correlation a little bit more with how solid the skill position players are over there on the 49ers side. So a little bit expensive, particularly with the guys that you're stacking Purdy with, but I think well worth it because of both offenses being extremely competent and then the high total, as I mentioned before. Then the last stack number 4 that we're going to go through here is Kirk Cousins going up against the Seahawks defense. And I believe this is the second highest total of the entire week. All of these at least 47-point totals over there on sportsbooks, and Kirk Cousins has been lighting it up through the air. I honestly thought that he'd come out a little bit slow after the devastating injury, but he looks like the Kirko of old. In fact, I think he really enjoys being down there in Atlanta, is trying to connect with the community as much as possible. Seems like an Atlanta resident already, which I find hilarious. That's awesome for Kirk that he seems to like it down there so much. But he's 19.1 point projection, which by the way is just a little bit lower than Jordan Love, and he's cheaper than a Jared Goff and Purdy, and I have him as the better play out there for Sunday. And while he's getting a little bit of ownership, as he'll get in nearly a 50-point total, I mean, Geno Smith, by the way, is over 10% ownership at the quarterback spot. The side I'd rather stack, though, is the Kirk Cousins at about half that ownership, especially because the Seahawks have a competent running game. This year, though, the Falcons, especially with Bijan Robinson, have not been all that effective on the ground. So I could see the Seahawks trying to commit to that run a little bit more. In fact, Kenneth Walker III is one of my core plays out here for Sunday. High total game. So whether I'm playing a Falcon stack or not, I'm probably going to have a lot of Kenneth Walker in lineups. And especially because Geno is so highly owned, that means that I'm going to be much more willing to go out there and stack Kirk Cousins as he fits the game scripts with Kenneth Walker III a little bit better, and also is the lower owned option. So what you're getting with these 4 game stacks are games that could be a little bit higher scoring. They've got shootout written all over them, all high totals, all relatively close spreads as well. And while sometimes we only mentioned 3 game stacks out here, these 4 were so obvious, they were so solid that I wanted to add in a little extra one for you guys. So of course, you want all my DFS projections, you want to see all the quarterback stacks I'm going with, make sure to check out my Patreon page. There'll be plenty more updates over there. On there, of course, you've got my projections, ownership for every single player. You've also got the stacking notes there. Is going to make you a much more informed DFS player. Not only are you going to have up-to-date projections that account for every single piece of injury news, but also the most up-to-date projections in terms of ownership to go out there and make those game theory decisions. It's probably the most important aspect of playing in those large field GPPs, and I pride myself on having the most reliable and accurate data as humanly possible. So make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already. I am constantly updating that, and of course, everything is uncensored over there. So there's no like black, overlays out there on the content. You're going to get all my projections for every single player on any given week. That includes the main slate like you see in this specific video, but also all the showdown content that you may or may not have already seen over there on my channel as well. So for example, we've got a London slate over there on Sunday morning that will be covered over there on my Patreon page, as well as Sunday Night Football and the 2-game Monday Night Football slate. So I'm covering all the football, every single game here throughout the 2024. Check out the Patreon page for all of that content, as I mentioned before, down in the description of the video. And now for the prop side of things, where we're going to go through 4 props I've already entered myself. They might want to consider adding to a few of your own prop slips. So first off, over here on the Prize Pick side, where we've got a little 2-man slip for 3x. So first prop we're going to mention is the Saquon Barkley over on rushing yards. He's at 79.5 over there on Prize Picks, and on a few other sports books around the industry, like DraftKings, I believe FanDuel also had him at 80.5 yards. There's a tiny bit of line value there, but more so, I love this play from the traditional analysis perspective. So main reason for that being the spread out there between the Eagles and the Giants. They're huge favorites, the Eagles that is, against the really struggling Giants team. Not only did you have Neighbors a little bit banged up, he will be playing out there on Sunday though, but a team in general that has a lot of glaring holes, whether it's their offensive line lending up a lot of pressures, their defense being pretty piss poor to start this part of the year. Saquon Barkley has a perfect matchup out there for Sunday in a game environment and game script that is likely going to lead to extra usage. So you give me even the slightest amount of line value, already a prop that I was going to be eyeing up heading into this week, I'll take his over at 79.5 yards. So whether this ends up bumping up or not, I'm going to feel pretty solid about the number come Sunday, just because of the game environment, the situation that we have there, and of course the soft matchup against that Giants front 7. Next up, we got this over on Deebo Samuel receiving yards. Jawan Jennings was rolled out today. If you guys haven't already seen that news, that's not that big of a boost out there to Deebo's projection. What I more so like here is that we've got a close competitive game script, and if the Chiefs go out there and win again, they've been the better team between these two to start the year, then Deebo Samuel is going to see a lot of targets out there. I mean, in general, the Brock Purdy has been throwing the ball a lot here in 2024, partially because CMC is out. They're not leaning as much out there on the run. First 3 or 4 games, you did see over 20 rushes for Jordan Mason, but those were in heavily positive game scripts. Whenever they got behind, especially when they had that loss a few weeks ago, they had to abandon the run for the most part. So somebody like Deebo Samuel, I think the game script is going to be a huge positive here, just like it should be over there for the Saquon Barkley prop. And this is also at 54.5 on a lot of sports books. So just like the first one that we went through, even the slightest amount of line value, you marry that up with the traditional analysis that we went through, and that's why I feel pretty good about those 2 spots. So that's the first slip over there on Prize Picks. Of course, a lot more action that I'll be taking out there for Sunday, so make sure to check out the Patreon page for all of that. But now over here on the underdog side, so here's the first slip I ended up taking out there for Sunday. So first prop would be an over on Jahmyr Gibbs touchdowns, which this is probably like the 5th or 6th time that I've talked about this year, and I think last time out was the first time all year that it ended up missing. So hopefully we can get on the bounce back train with this prop, but it's the same thought process every single time that I take this. Frankly, it's going to be tough for me not to want to take this prop because of the Vulture program that we have going. And if you've already seen this before, maybe skip ahead 20-30 seconds, go to the second prop. But David Montgomery, if he scores out there Sunday, this is a refund, or if you have it in like a 3 or 4 leg slip, it's going to be a null or voided part of your parlay. So the reason why I say it's a refund is on a 2-leg slip on Underdog. If you have a voided leg, one of those 2, it's an automatic refund. So the reason why that's so important is David Montgomery, of course, is on the Detroit Lions himself, and he's nearly minus 200 to score. Now, to start the year, he had been like minus 120, maybe minus 140 to go out there and score, and that was a solid amount of void/push equity. Now, it's like nearly 60% implied push equity. Now, the sites like Pinnacle have him closer to like minus 140, minus 150 to go out there and score, but that's still nearly a 54, 55% implied hit equity that is sitting in our back pocket, let alone this nearly 1.2x multiplier that we're getting on Gibbs for taking his over, and his implied scoring equity that is like plus 110 out there in books. So he's got probably about a 40% chance to go out there and score, but we also have over 50% chance to go out there and void or push this bet. So that's why I've been hammering this the entire year. I think last year or last week was the first time that it ended up failing us, but I'm not gonna worry about that, especially when it's in one of the highest totals of the entire week. The Detroit Lions are playing the Vikings Vikings, as I was mentioning before during the fantasy section. And in a over 50-point total, there are going to be a lot of touchdowns to go around. So that's why David Montgomery is nearly minus 200 to go out there and score. But do not sleep out there on Jahmyr Gibbs, as he is the big play back out there for the Lions. And if he takes one for a home run, well, he's probably going to get in the end zone with that breakaway speed. And I matched that multiplier up with an over on Jackson Smith-Njigba's receptions, which is at 0.86x. But since we have the 1.2x multiplier up here, this is a 3.07x payout. So it's actually a little bit better than you would normally get for a two-leg slip. And what I like about this prop is it's another super high total game. So as I mentioned during the fantasy section, that Seahawks-Falcons game is, I believe, the second highest total on the entire week, behind this first game that we went through. So you're going to see a lot of offense out there between those two teams, at least if the game total, that kind of script comes to fruition. And Jackson Smith-Njigba has been the second most targeted player out there on that team. And what I like about this specific matchup is the Falcons, they've got some decent defensive backs, particularly when it comes to safety help. And you're going to see a lot of that elite tier safety help go towards DK Metcalf. He's the biggest downfield threat that you have out there in the Seahawks. He's the fastest, most physical, strongest player that they have on that offense, and you're going to see a lot of respect given to him, and that's really how you shut him down. If you put a safety over the top and you put some man-to-man coverage on him, it's going to be pretty tough for him to go out there and kill you. What that would open up, though, is a lot of running room for guys like us, Jackson Smith-Njigba, or potentially even a Tyler Lockett. The reason why I prefer Njigba here is because he does have the second highest totals in terms of targets out there on the team, and it's only like 5 lower than DK Metcalf. So considering that they have those elite safeties over there on the Falcons, I'm going to try and avoid those two defensive back looks. And I think that Jackson Smith-Njigba is the prudent play to do that with. He might play out of the slot a little bit. He usually plays on the outside. They usually let Tyler Lockett play in the slot a little bit more, but if he plays out of the slot, that would be even better for his chances. So he was minus 170 for his over on Draftkings. I believe at least minus 150 odds on most sports books to go out there towards his over. So solid juice there, but we are getting this at a 0.86 multiplier. So, you're paying for it a little bit, but because we did have nearly 1.2x multiplier on Gibbs, I took the payout for a little bit over 3x. So as I mentioned over there with Prize Picks, I'll have a lot more exposure coming before lock. So for all of that, make sure to check out the Patreon page. On there, I'm posting all the slips I'm getting to as I enter them. So there might be a few bumps on this by the time that you see it, right? Whether it's the yardage bumps in Prize Picks, potentially a multiplier bump over here on the underdog side. For everything, when it first comes out, no stale lines, anything like that, Patreon place is the place to be. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the DFS and prop preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me, and also comment down below who you've got as the top DraftKings scorer tomorrow for a chance to earn a free month of my Patreon page. If you get the top score, and it'll be first come, first serve, so go ahead, claim your player before anyone else goes down there and steals them, you will win a free month of my Patreon, which of course is where I'm posting all the projections that you see throughout my videos, the spreadsheets completely uncensored, as well as all the different prop slips that I'm taking as well. So check out the link in the description of the video to go out there and join if you don't want to win the contest and join. If you want to join right now, make sure you have all the content out there for Sunday's main slate. Check out the link down below. So that's all I've got, guys. Appreciate your support here on the channel as per usual. Smash that like button. Also subscribe if you guys haven't already so you don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our Monday Night Football preview, all the content throughout the rest of the season, and all the golf stuff that I'm posting too. So if you're watching NFL this year, if you're playing fantasy, subscribe so you don't miss any of that to come, and let's have ourselves a Sunday.